Hello and welcome back to this wave support. I see from your clinical request that your redesign is working a little bit better from a fitting standpoint. It looks like your recapture of that lens with the topography is giving you a better representation of this cornea, but it sounds like the lenses are still maybe on a little bit on the steep side and you're concerned about centration. From the videos that you attached, as you know, those lenses actually fit pretty well. If that was a spherical case, you'd be pretty much done. But since we're trying to get the center well, there's a couple little things you can try. Just a couple of comments. If you remember in these wave lenses, the axial mode tends to look very precisely at the central topography, and tangential mode tends to work a little bit better representing the peripheral part of the corneal topography. So when I design these lenses, if I'm having trouble with the lens centering, I try to get as much of the back surface of that lens. If you remember, that's this blue line when we're looking at the upper right of the quad view. That's that upper line as represented in relationship to the lower green line, which is the cornea. So I look around these meridians and I try to, if I can, get that lower line and that upper line to be very, very closely in line, especially in this blue to pink zone. That's the primary landing zone out near the periphery. So I will try to very closely get those to match. So it is true that in this particular design being rather symmetrical, GSIM is an appropriate choice for that. However, if you're having some centration problems, there's a couple things you can try. You could play around with the edges to try to make the top, a little thinner and the bottom thicker and things like that. But what I like to do is I try to look at getting that lens to more appropriate line with the entire cornea and every meridian. So an easier way to do that, quite often I'll actually just switch over to freeform, because that'll now give me, instead of 2 meridians, it'll probably give me all the other quadrants, so it'll give me a chance to line that lens up a little more closely. Quite often I'll switch over to tangential, because that will now more closely align that peripheral part of the lens, or at least more closely look at that, more accurately look at that peripheral topography. Then I'll go ahead and just redesign it. And what you'll notice now, once that is done, and I'll pause the video for a moment while it's doing that. And here we go, you'll see that now we got a lens that's pretty well lined up almost perfectly in all meridians. So now you got a lens that's probably going to fit a little more snugly out there. And if you really look at quadrant by quadrant, compared to your other lens, you'll see that we've actually flattened the lens up somewhat in a lot of these meridians, maybe a half or quarter. So even though we flattened it up a little bit overall, we've also got it more closely aligned with that corneal line. So I would anticipate this lens centering a little bit more closely. Make sure you do enough tear exchange at that edge, and that'll probably align your lens a little bit better. Now, talking about pupil size, I usually start off with about, I think you said this patient's about 4 millimeters. You're about 4.3. I usually go about a half to 1 millimeter larger in the dominant eye to start. You're definitely going to want to add your minus over-refraction to this patient. And I would probably go a little larger on this one just because we did have some centration issues, and you don't want the patient to lose confidence in you. So I would almost rather make sure we can hone in that distance so they're happy with the distance vision, and then after that try to reel back in the reading either by over plussing the other eye a little bit, or then inching back up, or creeping back up on the bifocal design afterward. You're likely going to have to use a little bit of trial and error, and unfortunately that can run up the remakes on you, but it's something that you sometimes will have to just work with a little bit. Just a little comment here, just to keep in mind, when we think about, we always think about these bifocal powers as starting precisely at that position in the anterior optical zone, but keep in mind that the power doesn't change right at that spot. If you hover over this line in the upper left quadrant and watch your power at the very bottom, you'll see that we have a consistent power. But in this design, at about right at about 3.6 millimeters, and you'll see that's not quite where you set your pupil. You'll see that power starts to drop a little bit. So really, it is a transition zone in through that area, so it's not abruptly at that 4.3. So even though we think that the pupil set at 4.3, we usually actually start infringing a little bit on that pupil area just before that. So sometimes I like to look at this and kind of get a general sense of the power change, and you'll actually notice too if you go further out, you don't really get your full ad power until you start getting quite a bit further out there. So those are some thoughts. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll increase the amount of ad that I'm requesting. So even if the patient's spectacle ad is 175, I might another add a half to that, and that'll increase the power and get a little bit closer. Not unlike you might do with a longer corridor progressive eyeglass, where you might want to bump the ad just to make up for that longer corridor. So those are a couple things you can try. Hopefully you'll find that helpful. Sounds like you're pretty close on this case. Unfortunately, you're at the nickel and dime phase, as I call it, right where you're trying to tweak a little bit on that bifocal. And as you recall, there's no perfect bifocal, so we have to shoot for that 20 happy vision sometimes. With that said, I wish you well with this case. Hopefully this will get you over that last hurdle. Good luck, and thank you for contacting Wave Support. Have a great day.